Everybody.
Good morning, Ken.
We'll get started with the learning sponsors, and then from there we'll pick up on the daf. Okay. Year of Learning, Paul and Bob Bromberg, in memory of their dear friend Julian Smith, Yehuda ben Yisrael. In memory of Malcolm Mann, former member, and her family murdered in the Holocaust. Rav Tzvi Hirsch ben Shlomo Yaakov, Sarah bat Ephraim, Yisrael David ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Ephraim ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Adia bas Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Miriam bas Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Pesel bas Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Shalom ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Shlomo Yaakov ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Shmuel ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Cheryl Sher, her children and grandchildren, in memory of her uncle, founding member of BRS, Dr. Israel Brook, Yisrael ben Harav Akiva. Marcia Federbush and family, in memory of her husband, Dr. Uriel Paul Federbush, Uriel Pinchas ben Harav Shimon. Sharon and Fred Liska, their family and many friends, in memory of her dear mom, Harriet Friedman, Edelbas Yaakov. Leslie and Gail Kaplan, in memory of their parents, Harry and Marjorie Siddell, Irving and Pearl Kaplan. Friends of Avi Gitler, Avram Meir ben Shimon, and Martha Gitler, Charna bas Yeshaya. Friends of Toby Paris, Saratova bat Yisrael Dov. Friends of Malka Levi, Malka bat Yosef. Friends of Joe Wolf, Yosef ben Chaim. Many friends of Dr. Marvin Blush, Moshe Shalom ben Yitzchak Halevi. Month of Learning by Haran and Mel Haller, in memory of her father, Yosef Eliezer ben Tzvi Hirsch, by B. Pizer, in memory of her father, Yischar Dov ben Shmuel, by Mordechai and Miriam Burr, in memory of his mother, Manya bas Harav Shimon Halevi. Also a month of learning by Cheryl Sher, in honor of all those who joined her first series of epistemology of Tefillah classes. Then we have a day of learning from Shabbos by the Ainsley Friends in memory of Judy Hirschman's brother, Leon Weiner. Today, a day of learning in memory by Arthur Ritholz in memory of his wife, Duba Chaya Bas Reb Yosef. May the Shamas have an Aliyah, Kranka Rafia, Velti Yashir Hashem Tzliah, and L'chol B'nai Yisrael a good Gaben Shkiah.
Amen.
Okay. Zeb, how are you doing? Better, I hope?
I think so, yeah.
Good.
Recuperating.
Okay.
I got another personal problem, but can't help it.
Okay. All right. So, I'm looking at going back briefly to Vav Amud Beis. Okay. And on that Amud, we see that the Gemara has presented us with a machloket. Okay. And that machloket is between Reb Nachman and Reb Sheshet. Okay. So briefly, okay, excuse me, if we go up, sorry, from the bottom of the Amud, about 10 lines up from the bottom of the Amud, we can see that the Gemara is citing the basic premise, I'll call it, of that machloket. Itmar, it was said, Tumat Hamet. Okay? When the situation was such that you have mace tuma, okay, uncleanliness from a corpse, okay? Question is, can you proceed with the appropriate offerings? So we see in this example, Rav Nachman Amar Hutrahi B'tzibor. But Rav Nachman is stating that that's not the case when it comes to a communal offering. Okay? That is his position. Okay. On the other hand, Rav Sheshet Amar Dechuyahi Batzibur, that it's a situation there that it's only suspended in the case of a community, and that's when it's the entire community. Okay? And so this is what our machloket seems to be focused on. Okay? And the Gemara there continued, Heicha de'ika tme'in utahorin bahahu beit av. Okay? That's, it says, where there was a situation where in the same base av of Kohanim, there are both Tahor and Tameh Kohanim. Okay? Suggesting that's the situation. Okay? Kule alma lo plige de tohorin avde. Everybody, in other words, Rav Sheshet and the Rav Nachman, agree that then it's the Tahor Kohanim who should be carrying out the avoda. Tmeim lo avde. And those Kohanim that are Tameh do not carry it out. Okay, in regards to a communal offering. Keep pleading. Where do they argue? La'ahadure ula'atuye tahori mi beit av achlina, where they have to go back and then bring other tahor kohanim from a different base av, from a different patriarchal, a different Kohen patriarchal family. Okay. Rav Nachman Amar, Heter hi b'tzibur, v'lo mahadrina. Rav Nachman said there that it is permitted, okay? In other words, the tuma of the corpse doesn't apply really in the sense of a community, okay? And what happens? Rav Sheshet Amar, Dechuyahi b'tzibur umahadrina. And Rav Sheshet argues, no, that it's simply put off, it's delayed. Okay, and we do need to go ahead and find other Tahor Kohanim. Now a Gemara picks up and gives a different lashon. Ika de Amri, there are those who say, Afilo hecha de Ika Tahorin utmein bahu beit av. Even in a situation where there are both Tahor and Tameh Kohanim in the same Beit Av, Palig Rav Nachman, that Rav Nachman is arguing, right? Va'amar, and says, Avdei Nami Tmei, that here too, those Kohanim that are Tameh can still carry out the Avoda. As we get now to Zion, today's Amud, the Kol Tumat Meit B'tzibur, right? That this is a situation where, in the case of the entire community being Tameh, it's permissible for them to do the avoda. Okay, why? Rachmana Shaya, because he says that the Torah then permits this, because the fact that it's tumas mace throughout the community, that's why it's dechuya. That's why it's hutra. That's why it's permitted. Now, Amar Rav Sheshet says Rav Sheshet is a challenge to Rav Nachman. Mina aminala. Okay, on what basis do I know? He says, Tanya haya omeid umakriv minchat haomer. If it was a situation where the Kohen Gadol was going to bring the special offering for the Omer, that remember is done second day of Nisan, where it permits the community. then to eat from Chadash, umakriv minchat ha'omer, and he's going to offer, right, this mincha offering, v'nitmeit biyado, and it becomes unclean, okay, while in his hands, okay. So basically telling us that the question of what happens here, okay. Omer, he says, umevi'in acheret tachteha, that Kohen, especially the Kohen Gadol, would say we have to bring other grain, other barley, okay, that's used for the Minchad Omer in its place. Ve'im ein sham elahi, and if all they had was that particular amount of barley grain to be used, omrim lo, they say to him, have pikeach ushtok, that therefore be silent, in other words, be smart, so to speak, be clever, and keep quiet. Okay. Now, remember, that seems to be the position. Okay. You should tell about it, and none should be brought in its. But the Gemara now continues. Katani miha. It's taught, nevertheless, omer umevi'in acheret tachteha, that the Braita says, nevertheless, that he has to bring other in its place, which would seem to imply that in our earlier example, one would have to bring Kohanim from another Beit Av in the place, okay, if there are no Tahor Kohanim in that particular Beit Av that's supposed to be serving that day. If that's the case, okay, that it's Dechuya and not Utra. Now, Amar Rav Nachman. Says Rav Nachman Modina, I would acknowledge, he says, Hecha de'ika shirayim la'achila. That's only a situation where there's enough omer, barley grain, okay, where there could be then, you had some that was going to be, remember the leftover was going to be eaten by the Kohanim, that amount that was not put on the Mizbeach. And so where you have some, that's where I would acknowledge, he said. Now, another challenge to Rav Nachman. Meitive. Hayamar kriv minchat parim ve'elim ukvasim v'nitmeit biyado, says the Braita. If he was expected to bring an offering of oxen and rams and lambs, and they became, the rams and sheep became tameh. What's the status? Okay. Omer umevi'in acheret tachta. It says we bring others in its place. Ve'im ein sham elahi. And if there's only, okay, that amount that was initially brought, okay, what happens? Omrim lo have pikeach ushtok. Then they say to him, be clever, be wise, and keep quiet. Right? So that challenge to Rav Nachman now is going to be further examined, because Rav Nachman's going to respond. Ma'i lav parim elim ukvasim dechad. Are we not talking then, for example, about the oxen and the rams and the sheep that were brought on Chag, on Sukkot? After all, remember on Sukkot, we brought increasing numbers of offerings each day. So there should have been plenty. Okay? Amar lach Rav Nachman, and therefore Rav Nachman challenges and comes back and says, well, we're not talking about that example. we're talking instead of a different communal offering, parim, par avodah zara. We're talking about oxen when that ox is being offered in regards to a situation where the community was suspected in general of idolatry. Afal gav de tziburhu kevan delo kavia leizman mahadrinan. That even though it doesn't have a fixed time associated with that korban, nevertheless, we have to go back, Rav Nachman answers, and get a new group of Tahor Kohanim from another Beis Av, Elim. And when the Braita refers to rams, okay, Be'ilo Shel Aharon, that is the ram that referred to the specific ram of Aharon, okay, that was offered on the Day of Atonement. The afagav, the kavia leizman, that even though it has a specific time identified with it, kevan diyachidhu mahadrinan, since it was only an individual offering, okay, we do again, Rav Nachman argues, have to go back and get a tahor group of kohanim, kivasi, and when that Braita referred to sheep, bekevis haba'im ha'omer, there we're talking again about specifically the sheep that was brought with the omer offering itself. Shirayim de'ika shirayim la'achila. And that's only a situation where, again, there was enough barley grain available that would have been for eating by the Kohanim, but we can still take from that to replace the Tameh barley, the Tameh Omer offering, and therefore arguing again that it's Dichuya and not Hutra, that it's only put off and must be done and not permitted to go ahead. Now, the Gemara says, hold on. We're going to bring another Braita to challenge Rav Nachman's view. Dam shenitma uzorko. Okay, a situation where we have blood that became tameh, and nevertheless it got sprinkled. Bishogeg, if it were done by accident, hurtza, it's considered acceptable. B'mezeh, if it were done on purpose, lo hurtza, then it's not considered acceptable. Okay? Therefore, says the Gemara, Kitanya hahi diachid. Rav Nachman would argue, no, that's only a situation when it was an individual offering. That's the case. So now a Braita, a new Braita is coming. Okay? So having said all of this, the Braita is going to raise a new question. Okay? We often say, according to the Torah, that the tzitz of the Kohen Gadol brings atonement even when there is a problem with the offering itself. In other words, if even though we normally say that the blood and the sprinkling of the blood is what brings atonement, what role then does the tzitz play? And so the Braita tells us the following. Tano Rabbanan, says the Braita. Tashma. Al mahat tzitz meratzeh. On what basis then does the tzitz, okay, worn by the Kohen Gadol, okay, bring atonement? Al hadam, ve'al habasar, ve'al hachelev shenitma. For any blood, I'm saying, for any meat, and for any, let's call it fat for the moment, okay, that became tameh. Bein b'shogeg, bein b'mezid, whether it was done accidentally or on purpose. bein ba'onus, bein baratzon, whether it was done by accident or whether it was done willfully. Bein biyachid, bein b'tzibur, whether it was in regards to a private offering or a communal offering. And the Gemara picks up and then continues. Ve'isal gadata, tuma heter hi b'tzibur. And if you're of the opinion that you think that when it is a situation of tuma, okay, that it's permitted to go ahead and still do the offering for a communal situation, lama li l'ritzuye. Why then do we need to say that the tzitz is the what can bring atonement in that situation? Amar lach Rav Nachman, and thus Rav Nachman would argue again, ki katane hatzitz meratzeh adi yachid. When it says that the tzitz brings atonement, it's in regards to a private individual offering. Ve'ebayet ema, or if you want, I might say, afilu tema b'tzibur, even if it might be a situation regarding a communal offering. Bahanach delo kaviyeh lazman. We're talking about those situations where there is not a fixed time. Okay? Now, Gemara is not satisfied and therefore brings a challenge with a braita. Mei tivei. Our pasuk reads, "V'nasa Aharon et avon hakadoshim." Right? That the pasuk says, "And Aaron shall bear the iniquity committed in the holy things." V'chi eza avon hu nosei. And so therefore we could ask, with the high priest, in this case Aaron, wearing the tzitz, what iniquities does it carry? Does it atone for? Im avon pigul, if we're talking about a situation where it's the sin, the avon of pigul, okay? Where remember we've said that it's pigul being outside, okay? It's a normal location. Harei kvar ne'amah lo yiratzeh. It's already written, if we go back and look at that pasuk, right? It already says that it's not acceptable. Ve'im avon notah. And if you want to suggest that the sin that the tzitz atones for is notah, that it's beyond an offering not within its appropriate time frame, harei kvar ne'amar lo yechashem. The pasuk already has said it's not going to be considered. Okay? As we go over now to Zion Amud Beis. Ha'enono say ela avon tum'ah shehutra miklala b'tzibur. Therefore, Rav Nachman would argue, okay, it only therefore comes to show that the tzitz atones for a sin of impurity when it's a situation that it's permitted, okay, concerning the general rule of communal offerings. The kasha, the Rav Sheshet. And therefore, that is problematic to the view of Rav Sheshet, okay, who said, right, that it's techuya and not hutra. So the Gemara now tells us, Tana'aihi. This is actually a machloket Tana'im, the issue of what the tzitz atones for. The Tanya, because we have a braita that teaches tzitz, bein sheyeshno al mitzcho, bein she'eno al mitzcho, miratzeh. That's a tzitz, regardless of whether it is on the forehead of the Kohen Gadol or not, it does satisfy. It is acceptable. Divrei Rabbi Shimon. That's the view of Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Yehuda Omer. However, Rabbi Yehuda disagrees with him and says, Odehu al mitzcho meratze, while it's sort of still on his forehead, it's acceptable. Ein odehu al mitzcho, when it's not on his forehead, eino meratze. Then, says Rabbi Yehuda, then it doesn't bring atonement pardon. What happens? Amar lo Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon then disagrees, and we see this is this machloket. Kohen gadol b'yom haKippurim yochia. The example of the Kohen gadol on Yom Kippur itself, okay, will prove that when the tzitz is not on his head, on his forehead, okay, it does not bring atonement. She'ein odehu al mitzcho, okay, that when it's not on its forehead, umiratze, and it still brings atonement. Because when he goes in to the Kodesh Kadoshim, he has to remove all of his 8 garments, and therefore he's removed the tzitz, but there is still atonement carried out. Of course, we could argue, okay, in that case, as we're going to perhaps see in the Gemara, yes, there's atonement, but that's not because of the tzitz on that day. It's because it's the very nature of the offering in the Kodesh Kadoshim on Yom Kippur. So Amar lo, Rabbi Yehuda. So Rabbi Yehuda responds to that attempted example, okay, of not wearing the tzitz as part of Yom Kippur all the time by the Kohen Gadol. Hinach leKohen Gadol b'Yom HaKippurim. Enough of the Kohen Gadol in Yom Kippur. Shetumah hutra lo b'tzibur. Because there, okay, any kind of tumah is permitted in regards to the tzibur. Why? Because again, he could argue that it's the nature of the day itself, that offering, that brings the atonement. Miklal, the Rabbi Shimon Savar, Tum'ah dichuyahi b'tzibur. Why? Because Rabbi Shimon is of the opinion that public tumah is simply put off regarding a communal offering. In that situation. Now, Amar Abaye. So Abaye now says as follows: Benishbar hatzitz. What about a situation where the tzitz becomes broken? The kuli amar lo plige de lo meratze. That everyone, namely both Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon, agree that it does not work, that it does not bring atonement. Ki plige the tali besichta. Where they argue, says it's when it's simply hanging on a peg in that situation. Rabbi Yehuda Savar al metzach v'nasa. Rabbi Yehuda bases it on the pasuk that says on his forehead, and it carries. In other words, it brings, okay, it'll bear the atonement. That's what he bases his opinion on. The Rabbi Shimon Savar Tamid l'ratzon l'fnei Hashem. And Rabbi Shimon disagrees and says, right, just the opposite, okay, that he'll continually wear it upon his forehead, and thus it will be acceptable to Hashem. My Tamid, what do we mean when we say that he's going to wear it continuously? Ilema Tamid al mitzcho. If we're saying that he's wearing it continuously on his head, mi mishkachet la. Do we really find that's the case? He asks. Mi lo ba'e me'al lebeit hakiseh. Don't we find that he has to remove it when he has to go into the beit kiseh, to the privy restroom? Milo bai minam. Don't we find that it's necessary that he has to remove it if he's going to sleep? Ela tamid miratzehu. But rather for to continuously be associated with the tzitz, it must mean, he would argue, that it continuously brings pardon, brings atonement. Ula Rabbi Yehuda, and according to the view of Rabbi Yehuda, Nami hakativ tamid. Isn't it also written continuously? His answer would be, Hahu tamid shelo yasiach da'ato mimenu, that he doesn't take his focus, his mind off it. He doesn't dismiss it from his mind. Okay? Kidarava bar Rav Huna, as similar to a statement by Rava bar Huna, the Amar Rava bar Huna, who said, okay, at a time when Chazal normally wore the tefillin all day, Chayav Adam lemashmesh b'tfilav b'chol sha'a v'sha'a, that a person is expected to touch, to feel his tefillin at least once an hour. Kal v'chomer mitzitz. How much more so, okay, should the Kohen Gadol also apply that idea to the tzitz? In other words, just as the sage, right, must have some continuous reminder that tefillin are on his head and arm, so the Kohen Gadol must have an ongoing reminder. We'll just continue a little bit more on to Chet for today, and then we'll stop. Umatzitz she'ein bo ela azkara achat, since whereas the tzitz only has a single reminder, mention of Hashem's name, okay, written on it. Amra Torah al mitzchot tamid, and it says in the Torah that it's on his head, forehead continuously. Shelo yasich da'ato mimenu, that he shouldn't take his mind off of it, dismiss his mind from it. Tefillin, okay, sheyesh bahen haskarot, that tefillin where they have multiple mentions of Hashem's name on it, alachat kama v'chama, how much more so that should apply then? Ula Rabbi Shimon, but as far as Rabbi Shimon says, Da'amar Tamid Meratzeh, who argues that the tzitz then continuously brings pardon or atonement. V'hakativ al mitzcho v'nasa, isn't it written also that it's on his forehead and then bears responsibility, implying that it's only active that seats when it's on his forehead. Hahu likboa lo makom hu da'ata. He would argue that pasuk therefore comes to simply tell us the appropriate place where the tzitz is supposed to come. The Rabbi Yehuda, and as far as Rabbi Yehuda goes, likboa lo makom, when it comes to establishing the appropriate place for the tzitz. Minale, and what does he base it? Nafkele me'al mitzcho. He derives it from the phrase me'al mitzcho, okay, from on his forehead. Rabbi Shimon, nami, tepukle me'al mitzcho, en hachinami. And Rabbi Shimon also, okay, can learn it from the phrase al mitzcho, okay, and therefore, okay, he doesn't attach, okay, any specific ein hachinami. There's no then real difference, except that we see that there's a difference between al mitzcho, right? And that, rather should we say, his forehead, mitzcho, as opposed to al hametzach, on the forehead. Okay? So the Gemara is going to pick up a little bit, ela al mitzcho, v'nasa maya vile, but where it says on his head, and it bears atonement. What does he do with it? Amar lach ra'ui lemetzach meratzeh. She'eno ra'ui lemetzach eno meratzeh la'afoke nishbar hatzitz delo meratzeh. And that's where we're going to stop today, actually. Okay, so his argument is when it says it's on his forehead and it atones, what does he do with it? He would tell us that so long as the tzitz is suitable to be on his forehead, that's when it brings atonement. When it's no longer suitable to be on his forehead, as in the example of if it's broken, it does not bring atonement. And that's where we'll stop. Okay,
And according to Rabbi Yehuda,
all right. So we'll see tomorrow what the Gemara wants us to clarify, okay, on this Tannaitic argument, okay, but what happens, how does that apply then to the other argument as well, okay? So everybody take care, have a good day,
you too, Reb, thank you.
stay well, everybody.